this is a continuous.
Okay. So, hi. My name is Pieter van der Gaag. I live here in Amsterdam and I have the privilege of directing a foundation that was set up to support a global movement for ecosystem restoration and regenerative practices, as we say. And I'm going to take you through a whole hour together with Maarten through a workshop. And we're trying to disrupt the system so that the system will work for us. But this is sort of old system. Anyway, what I want you to do, I first want to have a little conversation with you standing around. I'd like for you to tell me, and not everyone, because then we're an all hour, why you're here. Why do you feel you want to connect? Why do you want to be part of Grounded? What makes you care to be here? I'm really curious. Anyone volunteering to talk about why you're here? Otherwise, I'll just point to someone.
I can say why I started to be here. Kind of like this. 2 years ago, I did a sustainable development masters at the Utrecht University.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a career event, and everyone was super fancy, you know, like metabolic, Deltalis company like there. And it was nice and stuff, you know, like we had chit chats. But then I looked up in a garden, and there was a lot of like people like our age, like half naked gardening. And I was like, I wish I was there instead of here. So yeah, in the end I joined Grounded because I like this idea of like my life is not only like my work, but then it's also about like community building and like also being able to think a bit outside the box and like be with like-minded young people. And
Okay.
I've been there since then, and I have a normal job.
Any,
First conservation, but
any of you motivated to be here because you're, for example, afraid of climate change? Yeah? Really afraid? Like it's debilitating fear, or it's there?
We need to get in action.
We need to get in action, yeah? Anyone know about biodiversity loss and what that could mean? Well, you did sustainability studies, but someone else? Ecosystem collapse, a term you've heard of before? Yeah.
We're living in the country with the worst water quality of Europe.
Yeah. Yeah, we're living in a big green desert that we're maintaining with water that we still have here. But I now want you to close your eyes. We're going to go travel somewhere in our minds. I don't have any pictures to show you, so we're going to try to see if you can imagine it yourself. So if you close your eyes and feel your feet on the ground a bit. And now you're going to imagine you're standing on top of a hill. You're standing on top of a hill and it's hot. It's really warm. The air is really dry. There's a dry, fairly hefty wind blowing around you. See if you can feel that wind. And if you're focusing on your feet again and you move them around a bit, you feel that you're standing on larger rocks, larger stones. It doesn't feel solid. It's unstable a bit. You have to really be careful where you put your feet, because if it flips, you're going to hurt your ankle. And keep your eyes closed, but now you're looking around yourself. Imagine what you're seeing. You're seeing green, but almost metallic green, yellowish soil all around you. And little spots of green. There's actually rows of green stuff. Little trees trying to grow, put in rows. And you just feel this dry air and it's really unstable. And you know it's so unstable because the rocks you're standing on is what's left of this hill. Due to the rains, all the soil has been flushed out. I'm Dutch, I'm trying to think of the English at the same time. Has been flushed away. So all that's left is the larger stones that the rains can't get rid of. And actually all down the hill, there's nothing but stones and a little bit of sand type soil left. And you know, those plants that you're seeing are plants planted by farmers trying to have a harvest, but they won't. There isn't enough water, the soil is dead. That's why it's this greenish metallic look. That's minerals leaching out of the stones, basically cooked out by the sun. And you look around, there's a town next to you, and maybe there's 2 people left there. The rest are all buildings that have collapsed. There is no one there. How does it make you feel? You can open your eye if you have this image now. How does that make you feel knowing you're there in this place that is obviously dying? And that is true for about half the planet. And there's people living there trying to live in a land that has been degraded so badly that the soil is no longer on hilltops and that plants will no longer grow. And if you think, well, that's a problem for just a few people, as I said, half the land is degrading and dying and is degraded. We have a really serious problem around the world. And it's caused by the way we grow our food. Already for 15,000 years. I'm always someone who says no one is to blame where we are. People are to blame if we're still where we are, knowing that we shouldn't be here. But nobody's to blame of how we got here, because it was kind of wise 15,000 years ago to start putting plants in rows and putting some animals together in a field. It made it easier for us to get our food, because it was rough and tough to get our food by just picking from what we found around us or hunting stuff. So it's a really good idea, but we brought it with, and when I was born there were only 3 billion on this planet, now there's almost 8. We brought it to a level where the planet can no longer sustain that way of agriculture. And people living in these lands where that way of agriculture over millennia have resulted in complete degradation, desertification, water resources disappearing, and also when it rains, because the water flows away right away, not obtaining any new water, we're seeing real problems. And we see in Europe the effects of that by people trying to climb in little rubber boats to get here. And actually, you just said it in the beginning, here too, things aren't that great anymore. So things need to change. And I started my career at the UN almost 30 years ago, thinking that through international agreement we could get this fixed. Once the system knows the science, and 30 years ago climate science, biodiversity science wasn't as secure yet as it is today, we would fix things. And what do we see in response? We see Trump getting quite a bit of traction on denying climate change and saying it's all a hoax. You see it here in the Netherlands too with certain politicians. You see it actually everywhere. There's this weird thing happening, it's called denial, that all these things are real and really happening. And my personal theory is that it has to do with our fear of scarcity, of not having access to what you want to do. Well, if you live in a desertified region, you know what scarcity is. You have nothing. If you live here, you think, well, I can still do what I want to do, but it's this fear of being reduced in your options that's hurting us. And then come these things, these food forests, this agroforestry, this regenerative agriculture as examples. They've been pioneered by many people, and they're telling us, well, this is actually really an abundant system. This scarcity doesn't have to be real. We can go to abundance. I want you to close your eyes again. And you're back on that same hill that's hot and dry, but now, that former hill, the sweat, the wetness on your skin was sweat. Now you feel rain. It's the same hill. We're 5, 6, 7 years on. It's the same hill. You feel rain. If you smell the air, it's no longer that dry, dead air. It feels like there's you smell vegetation. You smell life. And when you wiggle your feet, you feel it's more solid. There's still some stones left, but it's definitely more solid because if you look around below you, there's a dark soil. Pretty much what we're standing on right now, a much darker soil. Stones are still there and there's vegetation growing. It took a few years to turn that dead system into a living system again. And streams are flowing again in that area. And ponds are being filled with water, and agriculture is actually succeeding. You can open your eyes again. Ecosystem restoration communities is set up by our founder, John Yu, who witnessed this transformation of these dead hills in China, the Loess Plateau. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but if you haven't, Google it. Google the transformation of the Loess Plateau and see how hundreds of thousands of people with their bare hands, with shovels, transformed the desert into a completely thriving forest in just 15 years. And now, in 25 years, he just did a new documentary showing where it is. It's even more abundant. The system is still growing. 1.5. That's it. That's definitely still in my lifetime. I don't know how old you are, but it could also be in your lifetime. That is possible in a desert. It's actually the area around what we called the Yellow River. The Yellow River is no longer yellow. The Yellow River was called yellow because of the sand flowing into it through that erosion. But now that that erosion has been stopped, the river is actually clear again. That transformation has inspired people across the planet. I work for the Ecosystem Restoration Communities movement. There's now 60 projects around the world, in Somalia, in Syria, in Morocco, in Turkey, in Spain, in Italy, here in the Netherlands, trying to get biodiversity-rich meadows off the ground again, in Friesland, to get the grotto back. I don't know what the English is, king, I think, king of the garden. In England, in California, that has been ravaged by fires, and people living there no longer want that to happen. One of our first camps, we were still called them then, was in Paradise. 100 people lost their lives because they couldn't escape the fire anymore. It's a traumatized area. If you're still there, you still see the fire scars. People living there decided this never again. What do we need to do? There's lessons in how nature organizes the system that keeps it more wet that they're now trying to follow and they're trying to copy. In Mexico, where there's basically also the onset of agriculture in that area, and because of that it's dried out. In Guatemala there's now 160 villages who are stopping with slash and burn agriculture and replacing it with agroforestry systems. Much higher production, much higher value production, so there's wealth being created, plus there's stability for them for food, because slash and burn agriculture does not provide that stability. And finally, it no longer floods when the rains come, because the soils and the trees and the vegetation actually hold the water and release it slowly. 60 locations around the planet where people, not governments, farmers and people in villages and towns decided we need to turn this around. We need to learn from other initiatives around the world, figure out how they did it, and then let's just do this ourselves. And it works, because you don't need much. You need a shovel in some instances, you need people, you need access to vegetation. And when it's completely dead, you need access to microlife and mycelial stuff. And you know how you get that? You cook some rice, you bury it underneath a tree, and you have it. Really, it can be that simple. And it's this basic knowledge that we can transfer all around the planet on how you fix an ecosystem. And that's sort of what our foundation is doing. We have a knowledge platform, we have skill share sessions online. We're bringing these people together so that they can learn from each other. And with people like me, we're telling the story that there's 60 communities around the world, turning around that story of standing on that hill, no longer being able to hold your feet in one place, to one where you can. And when there's food and there's abundance and life. Yeah.
Shouldn't we break down the dikes over here and start with wetlands again? I mean,
Yeah.
then we can travel less, and wetlands can be very productive in food. And now the place we're standing now is approximately 3.5 meters below sea level.
Yeah.
That's better for this area. I like the food forest ideas as well.
Yeah.
But for the Netherlands in specific, I think we're not focusing enough on wetlands.
Definitely part of many issues that we've here, especially we're drying up the system, which is the problem. But it's different in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
But maybe that is a solution here. The one thing that I have learned to I never have an opinion on what needs to be done.
Okay.
People locally need to figure out what they want to do. That works best. So we don't provide you must. There's advice.
Yeah.
You know, one thing in dried areas, start capturing your water. You know, that's step one, through swales as they're called, or these half moon shapes. Putting little dams in little creeks so that the water slows down in its journey to the river. That's always a step in a dry area, because it does rain everywhere once in a while. And then you, sorry? So we have them. Yeah, that nature does do the job better than we do often. but beavers aren't endemic everywhere. So again, sometimes humans have to do it, especially when nature has left because of the degradation. Anyway, back to what I wanted to talk about. So if you're now imagining that the knowledge is there, we are learning more and more about how nature works. It's only recently that we figured out what mycelial networks in the soil are doing. That was not knowledge we had before. We are learning more and more how tree A and plant B interact, that they strengthen each other. That's new knowledge. So I'm always saying nature has the solution, but it's the nature we're just learning to understand how it works that has the solution. This is called biomimicry in agriculture. It really does work. I have one example that I visited in June last year, so it's a year ago now. It was in the Sinai Desert in Egypt. Nuweiba. Nuweiba used to fully thrive on tourism. It's the Red Sea, it's the beautiful coral reefs, it's the ocean where you can see your feet while you're standing in it. It's light blue, it's gorgeous. And then terrorism happened and people stopped traveling there. Now there's quite a strict dictatorship, which is also keeping people from wanting to be a tourist in that place. So what do you do when you live there? And when you were fully dependent on tourism for your income stream? You switch to producing your own food again. But in a desert, that's a bit of a challenge. One person decided, I'm going to try this regenerative approach. Habiba it's called, and it's called the Habiba Organic Farm. And he did it, and within basically a year he already knows I don't need as much water as I needed in my former garden. I'm building up soil and my plants are starting to thrive. Now there are 70 Bedouin farmers in the region who are copying those techniques. And this is the final point of what I think where ecosystem restoration communities are so interesting. They're forming little examples locally. This is how you could do it, and it works. And because people, especially in desperate zones where life has left, are looking at these examples, are saying, hey, you're successful. You have food, you don't need as much water, things are really happening there. I want to do that too. Now, in the olden days, NGOs would come in and scale up a large project, and this large project would fix all these problems. Now, especially with IT that we have, a knowledge exchange, but also because we're learning that local people actually live who have some intelligence, which we didn't in the past, it sounds horrible. They can connect and learn from each other, and that's how these 70s farmers are now copying these techniques, building up soil, reducing their water use, and creating food. Final example, smallholders in Syria. I'm talking about the driest areas because miraculously that's where the biggest changes take place. Within a year, food security has been achieved, water use has again been reduced, and they're able to create some income by selling their surplus in markets around Aleppo and then Damascus, and realize that's a place where nothing exists anymore. It's been bombed to smithereens. And that regenerative approaches are actually able to overcome the worst obstacles you can possibly imagine. You don't need a PhD to come in because PhDs can't travel to Syria anymore, and there's very few still alive because of the war. The people can copy these techniques themselves, learn how to do it, and it happens, and it's happening very fast. So my initial questions was to ask why you're here and what you're afraid of. I used to be very afraid, but now that I see that people can fix this thing on their own and we don't need the great gods above us to fix it for us, I feel much more hopeful. And I will invite you, because each of these communities is open to help. Of course, the simple one is donation, then you don't have to do anything. But on our website, you can click on each community and see what literal help they need. You can travel if you have a particular skill set. Some of them are looking for photography. Some of them are looking for knowing something about, you name it. Some of them are looking for bookkeepers. Volunteerism, but these communities need that help. And you can go and offer that to them and participate. Because our founder will say, this is the great work of our time, but it does mean we have to get to work. So a big invitation to come to work at all these communities around the world. There is one in Friesland. And a big invitation, if you don't want to work, to donate, so that these people can do the work themselves.
Naturally.
Thanks. Maarten.
Thank you. First of all, big applause. anyone have any questions still?
Sure, hundreds.
Big thing.
Yeah, just because I remember I studied sustainability science, and I remember also talking about a project in China where they were like trying to regenerate this ecosystem, that it actually had reverse effects. So
It does have some
also
different effects, yeah.
knowledge that some areas are supposed to be dry and they shouldn't be turned into a wetland or something.
Yeah.
Is there like
Yeah, the Lust Plateau wasn't
Repeat the question.
a time ago, and it's the size of Belgium. It's a giant area. So when they restored it, and life really, really improved for people living there, downriver, a little less water started to come down the river, which is an impact, because in those past few millennia, downriver, people were used to other water streams. The other effect is that deserts reflect sunlight quite well, so there is a slight warming effect. It's cooler on the land amongst the trees because they have the air conditioning effect, but the general climate impact is a slight warming in that area. That is also true. On the other hand, 5,000 years ago, it was such a forest. It's called Lust Plateau because it's got lust soil, which is the best soil you can possibly imagine to have. So yeah, there is the imbalance has been removed in that area, and it's created a new imbalance somewhere else, and that's what's being studied. And in the end, downriver, ecosystem restoration could possibly do some things there too. That hasn't happened yet. So yes,
it is taken?
everything is complicated and complex. Yeah.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
Because this is truly one of the most hopeful things I have seen. And myself as well, I studied sustainability science, and you saw only horrific graphs and models that basically said, in summary, that we're screwed and that many people were going to have to leave their villages, their homes, and all the facts that Pieter talked about. And it wasn't until I got really in touch with local activity, working with local farmers, that I realized that it's actually not so abstract and not so complex. It is doable and it is physical. And now to know that there are places to go where you can get active with this kind of work, where you can learn what it takes to build up soil organic matter, to increase biodiversity, to increase water storage potential, and with that increase the potential for good livelihoods, happy livelihoods for the people living there. So I think that is something incredible. I mean, we knew that it is necessary. Since these films of John and many other projects, we know that it is possible. But now to truly see that it is happening, I find very hopeful that for anyone who is worried about the future, who doesn't know what to do with their lives, there are places where you can go, where you can ground, you can land, you can learn and figure out how you would like to further develop yourself to be at service and to be part of these communities. And after experiencing this little journey for myself, we were also thinking, wow, okay, so it is practical and it is doable. Now, what do we need? Many people. We simply need many people, many hands and feet to pick up these shovels, to start planting, to start digging, and then we can fix this. So that's also the intention with which we did start Grounded about 4 years ago, by now in 2019. And we mainly wanted to prove 2 points. One, that it is fun to work on these topics, that trust me, after a day working on the land, you're gonna feel great, and after you have a delicious meal in the shade, you're gonna feel good. So the more sustainable solution is not always about less, and you're not allowed to do this and that. No, sometimes it's also about more engagement with the land, more free time, more delicious food, and I think that's something that we can show every time that we come together, we do work and we do events. And the second point was to really engage diverse people with these topics, because we do need everyone from all corners of society and walks of life to engage with this global movement. And I would just love to see how can we extend that invitation to anyone wandering around to go to these physical places and experience it. So my own personal journey was like, oh wow, this is possible. Now we're going to need more people. Let's go. And let's get active local, because that's where the soil is and that's where we need to do the work to restore our ecosystems. Now it started grounded. We did a festival in 2019, and by now we've grown out to this wonderful, diverse community with a co-creative place on a fortress in Utrecht, where we garden, we cook, we eat, we have workplace, and anyone is welcome, making it very easy for people to join. You know, come help out, and from there also really creating the space and the structure for people to set up their own ideas and initiatives. And that's what I find beautiful, because by now there are so many wonderful things happening that I could have never predicted, just because we're creating the space. And these spaces, these safe places, are being created all over the world. So from these safe places, you can engage human potential, and as Pieter said, they also start to nestle in the region. Because I also realized that, damn, now we have some 300-400 people who are all like-minded, agree, and are sharing this mission, but it's not yet enough to have a regional impact. So it's also incredible for us as Grounded to engage with our regional partners, being that farmers who grant us access to land where we can really engage with community, be that other city initiatives that create a marketplace for all the art, tools, food that we may produce. And all of a sudden, from this physical, cozy and fun spot, you are able to engage with your regional partners to start having a more bioregional impact. And that is hopeful, because at that scale, yes, you can bring back biodiversity, we can bring back water into their soils, and we're doing it. And that's something I find very promising. And now imagine that from these, like their physical nodes, or like social knots in our, or social nodes in our social mycelium, in a way. And how cool is it that all these local initiatives, often very small scale, are starting to collaborate all over the world. And I think that shows a true potential for real systemic change. Because if we at Grounded, we start mapping who shows up, and we ask, what are you good at? What are you looking for? Well, I've done that for many of you, and I fall from my chair. You're like, wow, looking at that inventory of skills, tools, and knowledge, what else can we do? And then if we empower the collaborations of our regional networks, and also we ask them, what are you doing? What initiative do you already have, and what are you looking for? Again, you fall from your chair. There is enough research budget out there. There is access to land. There are places to reach the market. There are communication channels. It's all here, and we can together build the future that we want to see. And by doing this mapping very locally, where you onboard through real human connection, you do, from real trust, are able to collaborate also interregionally to start tackling bigger questions and challenges. So one thing I'm very excited about is how can we, from these local activities, create kind of a new regenerative labor market, where maybe you go volunteer in Somalia, or you volunteered in Spain, or you go to an eco-village, and wow, that's fun. You learn what you're good at, and you get access to all these crazy educational tools that already exist, be that the Soil Food Web, Ecoversity, Permaculture, Gaia University. So much wonderful knowledge is out there. And perhaps, you know, you volunteered, you learned, and perhaps now either you say, hey, I'm ready, I want to set up one of these communities myself, let's do it. Or I can be a service as the future experts that you all are for other communities who are starting up and flourishing. And like that, we can enable the self-organizing exponential growth of this movement, because that inspiration, that real flame, is spreading very fast, and especially when it spreads through these physical, local conditions. Now that's just people, mapping the value of people. If we work together on data locally as well, we start measuring what happens when we apply certain new planting methods. Do we increase the organic matter? Do we increase the soil, the water retention? If we're able to measure it, we're able to finance it. A very other hopeful element when it comes to systemic change. And lastly, as well, if we have a serious big problem, for example, how do we fix dry land problems? How cool is it if we can shout out to these bottom-up networks, these local initiatives, and simply ask, hey, who's working on drylands already? and we pull together the people that are collaborating already on these problems, that are experimenting locally, and we see, hey, what have you figured out? Do you have any research module? Do you have a way to measure it? Do you have an extra little tip or trick that works? And that can be as simple as a Zoom call between different local initiatives that are working on these dryland problematics. And this is what I'm finding very fascinating. How can we organize these regional networks from real physical places where people can onboard and allow for this collaboration between local communities to slowly really change the system that we are living in. And it's not very long ago that I really started to believe, wow, this is possible. And one of the reasons that I think it's possible from working at Local to Local with all these farmers and seeing the change that's happening, from seeing this global movement of all these local communities grow like that, and also from just experiencing it with Grounded. Seeing the wealth of people that are showing up, the motivation to do it differently. And I think I will stop talking and make some room for questions after the last ones. But for me, it's starting to make a lot more sense. Perhaps we should not commit all our lives to pay for a mortgage that pays for a house that has long been built in the 70s. Perhaps those are a bit silly models, and we can actually do that more effectively together. So let's get with a diverse group, focus on creating healthy food, some good living conditions, and perhaps we'll even have more free time to make art and have fun. That's the ultimate dream, and I hope you guys all join. Thanks a lot. And then, any questions? Do you have something to add?
I have one point.
Yes.
I have one point. It isn't
With the microphone.
It isn't as simple as to just get started if you're in a dry land. And there's one thing that we're noticing, that is a lack of confidence. That when you do get started with something you learned through a Zoom or a platform or a YouTube film, is this really the right choice? This is where I come in. There is some funding necessary, because there is an academic sometimes needed that actually does the measurements of what the soil really is about and does the mapping of the water flows, because these are not simple things you just do. So, but then it comes to the point where we currently still go wrong. Then we think we need to hire a lot of people to come and do the work, when there's people living in that area who are very willing to fix their own home too. But they do need that bit of a confidence boost on this is how you really do it. You do need a real plan that has been made by someone that knows how such plans are developed, and then you can get to work. And that's what we're trying to do also. Right now in Somalia, you can't go there, trust me, it's very, very unsafe, because they're in Puntlands, which is where all the pirates are, and you are very valuable to pirates if you're from the Netherlands, so just you don't, and they won't have you come, but they do sometimes. We do have experts who are able to travel in such areas, who go and do the mapping. This particular community, it's if I were able to show you images, it's literally people living in those rounded mud huts with cows all over the place. They're the ones who are going to take on the work. It's a completely dried out riverbed system that is restorable. There is now a plan being developed, and they're learning techniques on how to do different forms of agriculture. That also had someone who could teach permaculture. That was needed to do that, but now that that has been done, the confidence is increased, and then people can start to experiment and figure out how it works in their particular region. Because honestly, if you've been herding around cows for your entire life, you know exactly where the hills are, where the water spots are, and where vegetation still is able to grow, and that's where you start, and you grow it from there. And that knowledge gap, the expert and the people on the bottom, is rarely bridged. So that's I think the big thing that we need to accomplish. Anyway, that's where we are.
Good
now
point.
we can have more questions. And if there's no questions, I have one more eyes closed exercise.
Great. Yes.
I have a question because Grounded is. Hi, I have a question because Grounded is like in Utrecht, and are you guys like doing the resoiling something there, or is it just? I don't understand, because I don't know if Utrecht is also like dried out or no, or.
Thank you for your question. Utrecht is not so dried out yet. All the She asked, do we do more regenerative actions also in Utrecht? And is Utrecht in the need of that? I would say Utrecht is not as dry yet as many other places are on the planet, but the diversity has decreased incredibly. And we're located on these fortresses, which since the Civil War, or since the Cold War, have not been used. And you actually see that because there fewer people have come, they become like little green paradise islands. And on there, actually, biodiversity does thrive. And there are islands within these green deserts where you see that there is very little growing there. And actually, I've even learned that there's more insects in the city of Utrecht than on the countryside, because in the city, they're not spraying the poison all the time. So one of the most important things that we can be doing in Utrecht is helping farmers to change their ways, to stop spraying Roundup and different chemicals. And one of the beautiful examples that we do is every year we go with all the young people to help biological farmers harvest the pears. We do that with William Pauw in Schalkwijk, with Local to Local. And this makes a huge difference, connecting young people to farmers, and through that they feel a bit of appreciation simply, and somebody says, wow, tell me more about that ladybug, and wow, that works with the soil like that. And you see that it inspires in both ways. So that's one of the practical activities we do. And on top of that, we're very much a cultural and educational hub. So we've also have a little garden where people can come and have their first little soil experience. We've done school trips, eatable foraging trips. So we're right now, I think, more on the educational side, but we are craving for the access of land to do more large-scale regenerative practices, permaculture, and these kind of elements. Thank you for your question. What? Lutkemeerpolder, great idea.
I have just a question regarding that. Are you maybe connected to the Safe Soil movement of Sadhguru in some ways? Do you know about that?
Yeah, we know him and support it fully, but not actively at the moment. No.
In some ways collaborating. Then I have another question, actually, if I can ask. You need kind of technologies to be able to communicate with other communities and stuff like that. How built up is that structure already? Do you have the technology to do that in some ways?
Good question.
One of the reasons we're getting so close to these people, because they have some really interesting systems. We have a platform, an online platform that's been given to us by a large California platform building company, and we organize Zooms, and we're now getting into the space because it really does work. And Corona has done to get people back together in rooms, because that's where the biggest connections take place. But a lot of the WhatsApp groups right now are the biggest knowledge exchange platforms that we have. There's one for all the dryland ERCs happening, very, very much happening. Tropical zones are talking to each other. Agroforestry people are talking to each other. More different kinds of regenerative people are talking to each other. Big thing in the movement is syntropic farming right now. So how does that work in your place? Because of the very fast changing climate, there's a lot of discussion how to deal with invasives. So there's all of a sudden a plant appearing that you've never seen before. Literally a picture taken, does anyone know what this is? And then sometimes you just kill it now, and some of it's actually quite useful. You should use it for this. So that's the discussions happening using online techniques. And in Mexico, where we now have 3 ERCs, there's a few eco-villages there. We're going to bring people together. And then hopefully we can also bring in the people from Somalia and other really dry areas to start talking to each other more in depth.
There's no system yet to have profiles of people, basically, that you look for people that have a specific skill in someone?
That's the thing that we're discussing with the guy behind you and this guy. We have the Zendesk platform, which is our knowledge exchange platform, does have closed communities in it, and there people do have their profiles shared, but it's help desk software, so most people don't have such profiles. But it's open material, everything else that's on there that people can comment on. And the community is only 60 ERCs, so people do know each other. If you're in a Zoom with each other every 3 months, and you go in your breakout groups, you get to know the others. And there's some really good relationships emerging. And what the one beautiful thing I think is, many of these people are quite alone in their regions because they're pioneering something new, and they're finding like-minded people, and you see an immediate connection. between them. You're one like me type stuff.
You're
and
also crazy.
Yeah, you're also crazy. Well, the people around you think you're crazy until they see what you're doing, and then they want to do it too. And that's the interesting part. Maybe are there any more questions? The question was, is it easy to get funding? No, it is not. It's not easy to get funding. Also because we're a fairly new NGO, as it's called, and then you need to have a long track record before the larger funders to get interested. It's also not expensive. The Guatemala project, 160 villages doing agroforestry right now, needed 10,000 euros to get started. And now they're fully self-sufficient, because they used it to build a tree nursery, and it went from there. And now there's harvests. Went quite quick, actually. So it's because it's local community based. People that live there already are already farming that land. It's not as expensive as it would be to fly in a few people who would come to do the work. But no, funding so far hasn't been very easy to find. I'm not saying it's impossible, but most of the resources we have so far gathered have gone to build those exchange systems. So a lot of overhead right now and very little on the ground happening. Most of the ERCs, they're autonomous, they're self-steering. That's the only thing that works. They do have other resources than what would come through us. We're not their sole funder. Yeah, and actually I spoke to someone yesterday who just raised $500,000, and I'm jealous. So, but great for them. Yeah, one of the ERCs. Yeah,
Great.
yeah, that's fantastic. Any more questions? Otherwise, I have one more. Yes, go ahead.
Maybe I'm thinking around too many points here, but I was just wondering whether you have ever encountered any resistance to share that knowledge with people. I mean, maybe not everywhere, but when I, for instance, think of that example with Sinai, and people are dependent on tourism isn't coming anymore, and then somebody figures out a different way to create, produce, and to sell it to a certain extent, their livelihood depends on it.
Yeah.
And sharing that reduces their ability to sell, for instance.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, we've been raised like that, right? Knowledge is power. So have you ever encountered resistance?
I'm sure they're there, but we have one. Sorry, the question was: have we ever found any for the recording? Have we ever met? Has anyone ever met resistance when they figured out how to do it? To not want to share that knowledge. Yes, those people exist. They're not part of the ERC community because we filter them out. One of the main principles of becoming an ERC is you want to work beyond your fence, is what we call it. You want to support the others in your region to restore that ecosystem. Also because you know that you and your little area, that's not sufficient to have a restored ecosystem. You need your neighbors to go there also. So so in Italy it started with one farmer whose harvest went really well because he had forest returned to his fields. And his neighbors started knocking on the door. And it took him a bit to want to help his neighbors, and now that he's done it, his harvests have improved even further because there's more natural systems that pollinate, feed, and do whatever, do the soils properly. I saw one more flutter of hands on the left.
We have one more question.
Yeah, just say it. Yeah.
If you have a little bit of you say, let's say you have a farm and you want to get in touch with some communities, like how would you be able to do that?
Through our website. erc.earth.
A wonderful map.
Easy to remember. You can map. You can find who's near you. It's growing. We have a new ERCs knocking on our door every month. We do them now twice a year. We onboard new ones. So it continues to grow, and it won't. I hope it won't be long, and the map is covered. It's already pretty impressive, but then, it's only 3 million hectares, and there's many, many more on the planet, so we can go there. Maybe one final exercise, because this is all about hope. Close your eyes again, and now I want you to just do one thing. What if all this regeneration and restoration was successful? Imagine what the world will look like. That's all you have to do. And with that vision in your head, go for it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pieter. And thank you all for the good questions and the attention. And indeed, let's go for it. Let's do this.